Hi guys, Paul,
Josh,
and Mike.
ManiacsMeat podcast. Just doing a little quick overview of the 80s. We just got done doing that.
Yes.
We were talking and we were like, how do we do this whole 80s over review? Do we do a top 5, top this, top that, And then Josh put up, or not, Michael rather. What is your quintessential? What film wraps up the 1980s for horror?
Yeah, what film? When you think of the 1980s, what film do you think covers the 80s?
You're right.
Overall?
Obviously excluding stuff like Ghostbusters. But in general.
Obviously.
Yeah, obviously. Because it's not even a horror film. But
I'll never live it down.
No.
Swear to God.
It's
Well, at least it's not
I'm still
Christine.
working with the Christine.
Yeah.
Same boat.
well, for those car lovers out there, get her done. Anyway, so you were saying with your shirt.
Yeah, Return of the Living Dead. I think if you want a movie that just totally encapsulates the 80s, horror, everything, that's the way to go. I mean, solid horror film.
Yeah.
It's got way 80s feel to it.
We were talking too. It's it doesn't even have to be a top favorite of yours. It's just it's a film that's 80s all over it. You know what I mean? For instance,
we were even discussing.
Lost Boys is
Boys.
very 80s. Now there's other My Bloody Valentine. Let me just go over My Bloody Valentine, Maniac. All these that could have been 70s. It's not stuck in time.
Yeah.
Even I would say Return of the Living Dead could be like a 1990 film, kind of harkening back to the 80s for me. It's not stuck in the 80s. It can't age well.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The quintessential 80s film for me cannot age well. It has to be for instance, Night of the Comet did not age well. Things like like Chopping Mall.
That's where I was going to go with it.
Chopping Mall did not age well.
Yeah.
But it's perfect in its own little area. You know what I mean? The thing is, technically, for instance, Night of the Creeps could have been a 90s film.
Night of the Creeps could have been a 90s film.
Could have been. Obviously it wasn't. And most films in the 90s, which we'll probably go over, sucked. But there was some gems. But that quintessential God, could you stop being 80s for a second? So what you going with?
Yeah, I'm still going with Return of the Living Dead. I mean, for me, that's just the 80s film for me.
I can see Return.
Return?
I'm going to say Return. If you're talking about just pure 80s cheese, fun.
You didn't think it aged well at all?
No, I mean I think it's. I don't know. I think it's a good movie. I think it has the music, it has the special effects, the canniness, the cheesiness. It speaks 80s to me,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you say age well,
I'm talking about it's just 80s
It's like the Fast Times at Ridgemont High, but horror movie.
Yeah, but that.
Yeah,
that's
this
how I look
film
at it.
that's
could never
same.
be made in the 70s. It could never be made in the 90s. It had to have been made in the 80s.
Yes.
I do think it fits the criteria. Then I think
Killer Clowns from Outer Space is dumb 80s.
Yeah,
but
again, Killer Clowns. I could argue that I could see that being placed in the early 90s, even without much of a.
It didn't catch it. Killer Clowns didn't catch enough of the 80s. It didn't bring it
in.
in.
Yeah,
it didn't embrace the era.
Me personally, I know it's not on our top 10 list, but Teen Wolf is very 80s.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Teen Wolf is an 80s film. My Best Friend's a Vampire. Super 80s.
Return,
Monster Squad.
See, Return does it for me because of the whole 80s punk genre that really is prevalent in the film.
Mm-hmm. There's no other films out there that use fucking 80s punk in modern films.
Sure,
I'm just
I get what you're saying, but I mean, you would never make a cast like that was so
I'm just it's an 80s film. I don't even like it very much. Once Bitten.
Once Bitten is
dumb 80s.
Super 80s. Once Bitten though. See, here's the question though too. Once Bitten is neon 80s.
Yeah.
Return is not the neon.
Not the 80s. Yeah, not the neon 80s. They're not material girls.
Yeah, exactly.
But that, Once Bitten is very material girl, esque, and then My Best Friend's a Vampire is that suburban 80s. You know what I mean? Where people actually do drugs. Yeah. Oh my God. It's the seventh heaven of 80s.
I kind of argued Near Dark there too. Near Dark.
I just don't feel Near Dark screams 80s.
You were saying that you didn't
for instance, in the 90s, vampires. The John Carpenter's Vampires just feels very near dark because it's got that kind of dirtiness to it and that kind of that filthiness to it. And they're like in the dirt and nasty and all that stuff like that kind of thing, which is not the best film from 1999. You guys will argue probably with that.
I have mixed feelings on
because it's Ravenous
Vampire, but that's some. Oh
yeah, because it's Ravenous.
You know, John Carpenter's Vampire is something totally.
Yeah, it's a weird dark. I like. John Carpenter's Vampires is a dark comedy that's kind of forcing you to laugh when you don't want to.
I didn't really think it was that good.
Exactly.
Yeah. I used to not like it a lot, but then I liked it a lot more. It's weird. It's a whole discussion.
I think Interview was better.
I don't want to get into it.
Interview's not, I mean, it's not 99, but I mean, for 90s vampires.
Well, yeah.
Interview of the Vampires going to get my vote for...
Brokeback Vampire.
Yeah.
For me, I know it's kind of like cheesy and whatever, but I'm not going to go with The Lost Boys, even though you could.
Good.
For 80s?
80s. Yeah. I'm going to go with like Fright Night.
Fright Night caught the 80s well.
I think Fright Night did slam the 80s there. Especially the nightclub 80s, the 80s like in general right there. Now, it wasn't dirty 80s. It wasn't dirty on the street, New York, rough 80s,
The Gate did pretty well.
The Gate could have been made in the 70s. The only thing that stopped The Gate from being made in the 70s was the music, because they didn't have a lot of that. Because they used like that kind of cheesy, that early thrash, that dirty, like the Bathory early black and like the Venom.
Yeah.
But technically, they had satanic bands in the 60s.
Well, yeah, but I don't think the Gate caught the 80s. Like you picture the 80s, think malls and teenagers and mall hair and terrible special effects and. Yeah. I mean, I really try to catch. I think of the 80s. Think of Fast Times. I think the Fast Times, Richmond High caught the 80s.
The whole any John Hughes.
Yeah, so like you try to incorporate that with horror if you're trying to catch the 80s.
Like Wood Chipper Massacre. God. But yeah, like Night of the Comet.
Yeah.
Very super 80s.
Yeah.
Overall, like so. What's your quintessential 80s film?
That's for me. It's still Return. Like Return really
that's your
captures
80s.
It for me.
Well, that's the thing is like one of my favorite films from the 80s. You look at The Howling and Evil Dead, but they could have been made in '79. They could have been like it's not quintessential 80s, but they're fantastic. That kind of thing.
Yeah, for me, Return. Just like I said, like the feel of it. The cast of characters in it. I don't think you could have a cast of characters written the way they're written set in the 90s or like any other time period other than like that 1980s, like smack in the 80s. I don't think you would ever get a cast written like that outside of that time period unless you were intentionally making a film that was like you were doing like a Salt Lake City Punk or something that was made later but was reflecting a particular time period. I feel like those characters really represent the 1980s.
Yeah. For serious horror, that's where you want to go.
That's where I'm going. I'm still sticking with
you.
Ghostbusters.
Ghostbusters. Okay.
No, I mean
horror and not
I know. Fuck off. But I guess since I'm ousted with Ghostbusters, I mean I think Return.
I figured you were going to go with Return.
Because, I mean, like, realistically, I mean, you can say it catches all the elements.
No, the problem is it's just like a fucking cliche fan grab film.
Well, it is. And I mean, it's one of those things, like, I mean, I enjoy a good cheesy horror, like Abomination and shit, but, I always think about the shit I grew up with that takes me back to a better time. And obviously, I saw Return before Abomination. And,
right.
So it has a more homestead for me,
Well, everyone knows, especially if you look at Twitter polls, that Halloween is the best 80s film.
Oh, no.
Hands down, I'm telling you, because nobody fucking seems to realize it was made in the 70s. Or The Exorcist, for another example. What's your favorite 80s film? They put Exorcist on it. Like, what are you fucking doing?
Came out what,
it's like 74 or 5.
Yeah,
like, I don't understand.
76?
It's stupid. Oh, no, Jaws, 75, but no, 85, whatever, fuck it, People are stupid. That's the moral of that story. No. But no, I would agree. I would totally agree that that does encapsulate the 80s pretty well for serious horror. I actually thought now this isn't total horror, but Tobe Hooper's Invaders from Mars is 80s as fuck.
Yeah, that's a movie that caught the 80s well too.
Yeah, and I love the fact that these sci-fi films needed the 80s to give it that insane craziness.
They did. I think that the 80s really boosted sci-fi. I think.
Yeah, it really did. It put horror with sci-fi and gave it that insanity that it needed.
Yep.
See, I mean, like, if you look at The Thing, or if you look at The Fly, and if you look at that,
those are all movies that came out in the golden era that just didn't hold up well, but the 80's made it.
The 80's made it
better.
Yeah,
made
exactly.
It took something already good and made it better.
Yeah, like The Blob was good.
Oh,
but
absolutely.
The 80's Blob, I wouldn't say it is better, but the effects are just disgusting.
It told a better story, maybe.
It's rough because I feel like there were, prior to the 1980s, there were so many good ideas with science fiction. They just didn't have the ability to portray them. I feel like the way they wanted to. I mean, even going into like, you know, Lost in Space time, and like when they were in Star Trek and Star Wars coming out, like all that stuff. And I don't feel like it really took off until you started getting really close to the 80's, and then you know, when Alien came out, I feel like that really kind of helped pushed it to a point where it was like, let's try and take it from just like a pure fantasy science fiction into like a darker, little grittier science fiction.
When did Alien come out? 79?
79,
right?
70 or 79 it was.
Yeah, exactly. So not 80s, but even though it's on the fucking polls.
And then that popped the science fiction genre into like, let's make it darker and a little bit like scarier. We can make it a little grittier. And then you get this whole slew
then Toby
of stuff.
Hooper found cocaine.
And then you get this whole slew of stuff that comes out in the 80s where they're able to piggyback off that, and you start getting stuff like Terminator.
I do feel
Predator,
another
like
thing. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. This is just my opinion. I feel that a lot of foreign horror at the time didn't have a sense of the 80s. A lot of Italian or Spanish, like Spanish stuff, felt the 70s or 60s.
Do you think that's because of them being I don't want to say a third world country, but
they're behind the times.
Behind the times.
They're behind the times.
Well, they're
but a lot of the Italian
stuff.
A lot of the Italian stuff, I swear to God, if you said 75, I'd believe you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They didn't have and the thing is, our sensibilities of what we remember the 80s as were not reflecting what they were experiencing in the 80s either. You know, see the American teen.
Oh
thing,
yeah. No, that's two different worlds.
It's two different worlds.
Yeah.
So you really can't say that. So if you're gonna pick something, it's got to be American.
Yeah, I mean, I'm weak with foreign horror from the 80s.
Right.
That's not my strong point.
But I would speculate what Josh is kind of saying.
They're
looking at what's popular in America, but they're behind what's popular in America.
Like Spanish and stuff like that. They're not trying to reflect what's going on in America, so that they don't have the same sense of place as what I was like. You know, for us in the 80s, you have Teen Wolf, you have Back to the Future, you have shit like that. You have Return of the Living Dead, you have Fright Night, you have The Blob, you have crazy things like that. You have Chopping Mall.
I would be more interested in seeing
Maniac Cop.
British horror from the 1980s.
It's extra. And it doesn't look like our fucking 80s.
That's another one I just didn't live up to.
No, it didn't.
I mean, because I feel like the horror genre in the 1980s did.
I have a lot of British horror from the 80s, and again, you swear it's the 70s.
Well, I feel like in the U.S.,
I don't think they caught up until almost the late 80s.
Horror in the U.S., I feel like it embraced the counterculture movement of punk rock and metal music and things like that.
I don't know a lot of
that didn't happen in.
I mean, like, because you know, if you want the 80s from Britain, you watch The Young Ones.
Yes.
But what 80s film has that Young Ones feel? None. You don't have a lot of films from the 80s with the skins and the rosters and all this bullshit and then the fucking all the movements going on, but in a horror setting. I mean, there are films like that, but I'm talking about with the horror.
Yeah.
You know, and you don't really get that in Britain. That we can reflect as well. And a lot of people from that harken back to the 80s that grew up in there never watched The Young Ones.
Yeah.
So they don't even know this shit fucking was even going on. And again, it was more of a whose mentality are you talking about? Are you talking about a British mentality, an Italian, a Spanish, or an American? And we're talking about the American side. So I still have to go that I do believe that you pick a good one with the Return of the Living Dead.
You might have made up for Christine.
Oh God! Thank God.
And just like that, because I guess it was the 1985. You both picked Return of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
And I picked Fright Night.
Yeah, which is kind of
which is weird.
Smack dab in the middle of the 80s.
Yeah, and it kind of reflected both sides of the genre for the 80s.
Yeah.
And I think we're probably going to agree to disagree again. I'll pick up Fright Night, and you'll pick that.
And you know, I don't think
which is kind of a coincidence.
And the great thing about it is I don't think it's like I would never be like Fright Night's terrible.
No.
It doesn't capture, and I don't feel like it'd be vice versa.
But
either.
at the same time, like I'm not a biggest fan of Lost Boys, but I wouldn't. But in this conversation, Lost Boys would fit.
Yeah, absolutely.
What kind of encompasses the 80s?
I think it's all what you like too. Like I like zombies more than I like vampires. So of course,
but I wouldn't pick Day of the Dead. The Day of the Dead doesn't. It has that miserable part of the 80s.
Yeah.
That miserable
downturn.
Still
felt like the 70s.
Yeah.
Too,
yeah, but it had that miserable downturn, crappy, bleh, but there was no sense of the time.
Yeah.
You know, all you knew at the time was shitty.
Yeah.
But there was no sense of it.
Yeah.
You know, so. And they were in Florida and Miami for some reason for a little bit. But other than that, yeah, with the tape on its face.
Yeah.
It's hard to say, like, okay, this is a zombie film. Flesh Eater, 1988, very 80s. But you know, but that could have simply, if you could have made it in 1990, I still would have believed it. Like Popcorn feels very 80s, but it was made in 1990.
Mm-hmm.
That is true.
You know what I mean?
Holy shit.
Popcorn is extremely 80s.
Yeah, it is.
But it was made in 1990, so that's not an 80s.
How did we get there? I never even put that together, and you're right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and you could get a low budget 1988 version of Flesh Eater, and it could have been made in 1990. Yeah. For instance, only 1 year separates Intruder from 1990, which Intruder I could see being 1990. So it doesn't really hold up extremely well for the 80s, like, you know. But I mean, that was later.
It's hard when you're getting on that cusp, that rollover, like.
It's kind of funny though, like you know, the two that we both picked that encompasses the 80s, like you said, we're dead smack in the middle.
Yeah. So
it got a little bit of what came before, and it reflected on what came after at the same time, maybe without even knowing it.
Yeah.
So there you go. So
it's a wrap up.
It was a little talk about the 80s overall. I mean, I thought it was fun going over year by year by year.
It was enjoyable.
Yeah, seeing how right I was most of the time, and how wrong you guys were most of the time. You know, I mean, that's enjoyable, and we did agree now and again.
There was a big stretch there where two of us were on the same side as to what we thought the best film was. There were like 3 or 4 years where we were all picking the same. Two of us were picking the same thing.
Or the one like I knew you'd pick that, so I decided to pick this, even though
there was that stuff too. Yeah, I was thinking this, but I didn't want to.
Yeah. So I don't really, and obviously this is just our personal faves. You know, you could pick something different.
Yeah.
You know, there were a lot of good films. I did think that it was really interesting when you hit like 87. There was no great films. There were good films, and there was no great films. There was years where everything was just like, hey, it's second best.
Yeah, like there were plenty of moments where I was like, these are all good, but I'm like, nothing's really.
Yeah, you have to pick your favorite, and you're like,
I like them all, but there's so many other like.
But it's not like one of those moments. Pick your favorite kid. No, it's like pick your favorite turd.
Yeah.
Like, well, that one looks like a mouse, I guess.
Shine shit.
Exactly. So, but I think we still had a good time. And
hopefully,
everybody else liked it too.
A lot of good movies in the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
So many of them are worth watching.
Right.
And even if they're not the best, they're still good.
Okay. Well, this is a wrap up of the 1980s real quick. And like I said, it was going to be a quick one. So this has been Paul.
Josh.
And Mike.
ManiacsMeat Podcast. Bye-bye. Watch this. You can pause it.